to Crypto Clothesline. We're glad to be here with you. Hanging out the crypto laundry. Getting all the crypto info for you. Crypto Clothesline. Crypto Clothesline.
Ready.
Good morning.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
I think it's just ticked over morning. But anyway.
Oh, that's
but not for you. Okay.
Yeah, stop. Just get over yourself, girl.
Okay.
Stop getting ahead of yourself. Wah, wah, wah. What a beautiful guy we spoke to this morning.
Yeah, I think we've only had some pretty lovely male souls on today. And on this money season, actually, haven't we?
Yeah. I mean, we tried to get Mike Maloney on. I couldn't get through. You got given the maybe later, which is lovely, and we got a maybe coming out of it. But I'm sort of thinking, gee, some of the people we talk to, a lot of people would never have heard of. They're kind of like the unsung heroes that are working in the background. All of them beautiful, like just such... the risk of sounding like a new age hippie, but just such high vibration, such a positive outlook and a desire to create well-being in the world.
Well, from what I gather, men and women in crypto are the sort of people who aren't, and I think this is what Joe spoke about a little bit, where we're all a little bit different. We don't adhere to the status quo. We think outside the box. And generally, people who think outside the box are open-minded and hear that more spiritual aspect of things. They love the idea of freedom and decentralization. And I feel like to be in crypto and to be in it long term, you have to have that mindset, because it's like that's the norm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there are different schools, though, within that broad category, because, yes, you could be thinking outside the box, but then, there are people that are just the when Lamboers, the ones that is like, when is it going to hit the moon? When is it going to go sky high? When am I going to make my money? And then you've got the people that are doing it really with a view to wanting to change the status quo of, say, the massive income gap that exists between classes, that exists between gender, that exists between different countries in the world. So there are people that are really working at it from an altruistic point of view. And of course, there's always a sense of fulfillment that comes out of that, which is Stephen Alexander talked about it last night in the Women of Blockchain event, and he was close to tears. He said, when I interviewed the women who were in Syrian refugee camps, we think we're giving. We've got the car, we've got the fridge, we've got the physical things. We think we're giving. And he said, when I speak to those people and they will give everything to help their neighbor, he goes, we're actually the ones receiving. We're the ones who are poor and they're the ones who are rich. And so, talking to people like that, you realize that there's a whole different, I don't really like the word school of thought, but let's say there's a whole different school of feeling that's developing where people are wanting to use this instrument for the better of other people. And that really warms the heart. And it's a very different caliber of conversation to, some of the guys who are very technical and they're good at trading and they can tell you when to get in and when to get out. I mean, we've talked to some interesting guys and there's an audience for that too. But Tone Vase, when we spoke to Tone Vase, awesome guy, great fun. It was awesome of him to come on the podcast. But his was a far more technical approach. It was far more about, I said that Bitcoin was going to do this. And, it was just a different caliber of conversation. So you did say yesterday we risk turning into a hippie podcast, but I'm kind of cool with that.
What I sort of appreciate with the bear run that we're experiencing right now is the people who came on to make a lot of money are the people who didn't really jump on for the same reasons that we did. And so just as projects have trickled away or died or whatever, so have the people who came in to win Lambo, because a lot of the win Lambo people aren't around anymore because, they've lost faith or whatever. And then now you've got a lot of the people who've been involved for ages. And yeah, the newcomers aren't really the greedy people because there's a lot of doubt going around. I feel good in the bear run at the moment. about like the people that I meet.
It's a funny thing, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, who is it? Abraham Hicks, and you can Google what that's all about. But they talk about needing a smorgasbord. So you don't know what you love unless you have what you don't like. And it's going through the dark night of the soul or going through difficulty that you actually come to perceive what you enjoy, what you love, what you value in life. And so I think in a way this quiet run, this sideways market, the fact that it's not a bull run, it's not all excitement and hype, it's survival and stick in there and we'll get through this. It's actually leading to a lot more cohesion within the community. And like you're saying, it's kind of like shaking out, the fruit from the trees and the fruit that's fallen onto the ground and gone rotten. Well, there's still some of us still hanging in there waiting for it to ripen.
Yeah, and there's two camps as well. So there's two educators at the moment that I'm involved with. One's Crypto Joe and the other one is Carl Stagol. And the both of them have two very firm positions. They're both in crypto. So Carl Stagol teaches trading and he's like, hodlers are idiots. They just don't know, what they're doing. They've got all these misconceptions. They don't understand what crypto is. And then you've got the other camp, and we didn't actually talk about this with Joe, but he's told me traders are, they're doing the wrong thing. They're, for various reasons, and I'm not going to put words into his mouth, but he's in what they both have this hodler versus trader. It's really, really funny.
That would be a great podcast. Let's do hodler versus trader. That would be a super podcast.
I know.
Joe talked about emotions ruling the marketplace and people buying because of FOMO, fear of missing out, all the different reasons, like hysteria. People get hysteric and they get involved because they're afraid of missing out, but they're not actually doing their due diligence and looking to see whether it's something that they want to be involved in or not. And they jump out for the same reasons. So they buy and then they sell and you get stuck in pump and dump situations and so on and so forth. But I think there's a place for traders and I think there's a place for hodlers. Myself, I tried trading and I don't have a very long attention span. So I found that it wasn't an instrument that lent itself very easily to my genius type. But if I look at the fact, and that's a funny thing, because if I can look at hodling and I can look at saying, okay, I bought a heap of stuff, I've bought a little bit of this and a little bit of that. 95% of it, as you said, I've got shit coins in my basket. But what's left, is that going to cover my loss? And, at the end of the day, as a busy mother and working and all the other things we do in life, am I really going to be wanting to sit up at night looking at the markets in the US while my kids are asleep? Or is it quality of life? I think that there is definitely a debate for side.
I think there could be a debate. Maybe even there might have to be another money season, because trading versus hodling would be a pretty fun podcast. But today, thanks everyone for tuning into this money season. We have an amazing interview with Joseph Shew, who is an educator on my platform Future Blackboard, and he's going to talk to us about diversified portfolios and how to manage our assets and what exactly are assets.
He's super awesome. We've touched on everything from cryptocurrencies to the gold and silver market. We investigated the pros and cons to a degree of real estate, whether it's a good time or whether we want to be putting our hard-earned cash into something a little bit more returnish, to use a very technical term. And we didn't actually touch much on the stock market, so I guess that just speaks for itself. So, I loved riffing with Joe. We had our list of questions. We didn't really stick to them, but we had a great time anyway.
And before we go into the interview with Crypto Joe, welcome to the Crypto Clothesline.
Our show is about helping women join the blockchain wealth revolution for themselves and for their families.
Our names are amy-rosegoodey and Abid Catherine Pass, and we're speakers in blockchain and crypto, and we're on a mission.
We're learning together with you.
Talking with leading experts in the space, exploring cutting-edge technology projects that are shaping the future for our children.
This podcast is for intelligence, for growth, and our values are for peace, harmony, and collaboration on the planet. And in terms of the money season, as you listen to the various podcasts, you'll see that we're exploring various aspects of money, the history, the future. What is money? What is a value exchange? What is a belief? It's a lot deeper than just, coins in a piggy bank or a bank account or even a crypto account. So it's really worth listening to the whole season from Woe to Go, because we're covering even the transaction of love.
And different perspectives from different people from all different walks of life. And this episode is with Crypto Joe. So should we have a listen?
Yes. Joe, welcome to the show and welcome to the money season especially.
Oh, thank you both for having me on. It's awesome to be here with legends like yourself, so it's an honour.
You are the founder of the Crypto Consulting Institute and you run crypto training all over the country, but you've been in business and finance since you were a little kid. And I would really love for you to tell the story about some of the business stuff you did when you were a child. But can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into crypto?
So the real reason I got into crypto, so I grew up in London and middle class family, my brother and I and my parents, and I never forget my dad working or having to work 3 jobs to support the family. And he would leave home at 4 a.m. in the morning and some nights even get in at 10 p.m. at night. And then that led me to start thinking there must be a different way. And I was very young at the time. I started my first business at 8 years old. I've always been that way inclined. But at 40 years old, my dad actually had a stroke and put himself in a really bad situation. And that was my trigger as to why I started looking for different things. And I invested in the London Stock Exchange at 12 years old because I felt it was my purpose to start creating financial wealth from a young age so I could also support the family as well. It's just the way that I was functioned, I guess. So that kind of led to a career in finance, and I've always invested in stock markets, London Stock Exchange, the ASX, and different avenues as well. And then I was working a long job, long hours in a job. I was doing extremely well. I was in quite a senior role for a global business, 7 billion US turnover. And I worked there for roughly 3.5 years. But I started to notice the pattern of working from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 5, if not sometimes even 6 nights a week, whilst I was investing in stocks and shares. And I could see that I was not really going to create the financial wealth that I needed in the time frame that I really desired, so I could have true freedom. And that's when I started looking at alternative markets, and cryptocurrency was that for me, given my finance background and my passion in that area, paired with the high growth opportunities. It was perfect for me to move into that space and later on start teaching people as well.
So are you saying that you came from I think you described it as a middle-class background in London, and were you self-taught in terms of being a 12-year-old getting involved in the stock exchange or shares? Or was that, I mean, how did you come to have that information or I mean, I understand where the inspiration came, but where did you learn about it?
Yeah, certainly. So my dad invested into property and shares. So I had learned an amount from him. And then I just had I'm quite an extreme personality. So if I do something, I want to know everything about it and do it properly. And that is what led me to doing more research, because at that point we had the internet. So I could do further research on it. And I just kind of got a little bit hooked on it. I've always had this obsession almost with money, not in a negative way, just I'm so fascinated around the concept of money and how it's constructed and how you can quite easily create it in different markets as well. So it was just a passion that drove me to then further my learning. And I've invested in mentors as well over the years, significant amounts as well to learn, progress and further my knowledge and develop.
And so what would you say money is, Joe?
It's the unquestioned belief that something has value. So money is a concept in itself, and then you have currency which represents it. So if we look at all the different currencies in the past that have represented money, from shells to cattle, to gold, paper money, credit cards, cryptocurrency now to an extent. It's all just different concepts of something that we have created as humans as money. So it's a way of storing value, passing that on to someone else.
So you worked for, a company who had like 7 billion turnover. How did you get that job?
Because I had a background in finance, I went and studied at university, and I worked at an accounting firm at a very young age, and I did a lot of summer interns. I think I positioned myself quite well. I achieved a first class with honours from university, so I think that helped me get the foot in the door, and then from there I guess they saw something in me that they liked. I don't know what, I'm still questioning that today. But
come on.
I think that just opened the door up, and they took a risk, and it paid off. I was in my last year, I was one of the highest performers in the world for my division, which was really cool. So I think they took a risk, and it worked this time. It probably doesn't always.
You talked about having, you said I've got a bit of an extreme personality, and you referred to yourself as going very deeply into it and wanting to know everything. But I would also rephrase that as having perhaps a yes bias. And there is that notion that you need 10,000 hours to develop mastery of something. And for me, a lot of us have a desire or a wish or an idea, and then we often don't get past our own doubt fields. We've got these kind of etheric fields around us which says, yeah, well, I can do this to a certain degree, but then, well, I guess I'm not good enough, or whatever our conditioning is. And so I would say that sort of extreme personality is more of an exploration of the yes. I can do this. I'll say yes to this. I'll say yes to that. I'll say yes to this. And that then leads to a deeper and deeper mastery and understanding of something.
Yeah, I definitely believe it's an asset. But like anything, when you focus on one thing too much, other things tend to be impacted by that. So trying to have a balance in different areas of my life as well is also very important, as I know both of you guys are well aware of that.
Absolutely.
So we're talking about balance, and that's something we wanted to talk to you about in this episode, balancing out our portfolio or having a diversified portfolio. And this is the thing, a couple of years ago in 2017, a lot of our portfolios were our baskets were pretty full of what are now shitcoins. So can you tell us, like, in a general sense, what is a diversified portfolio? What's a portfolio? Lots of people are probably, I just said the word diversified portfolio, and people are like switching off because they're like, too hard, nope, big words. But not just crypto, but a diversified portfolio with respect to the whole financial world. Can you tell us what one is?
So a portfolio is where you're holding and controlling your assets, and to diversify that would pretty much mean to invest in different areas to offset risk. So if we think just within cryptocurrency, if you were to invest just into Bitcoin, for example, 100% of your risk is held in Bitcoin. If you invested in a few different coins, then you're averaging out that risk. Then if you start to open up to different markets, so if we think about investing into foreign currencies or gold or property, tangible assets, there's different ways that you can offset your risk, therefore really diversify your portfolio. Because if we think about gold is a hedge against the US dollar. So if you are diversified into both, if one market's up, potentially the other market's down. So you can spread your risk and diversify that way.
And so when you talk about a hedge, can you unpack what that term means?
Yep, certainly. So effectively, when you're talking about hedging, it's a way, again, to minimize your risk against something else. So if you believe the US dollar is going to appreciate in value, then you might hedge against that market or with that market, so you don't hold full risk within it. So again, it's kind of similar to diversifying. You're splitting away rather than being all in one specific area.
And so when you talk about gold and silver, I mean, that was actually ostensibly my second entrance into crypto. We were a group of mums studying the price movements in gold and silver and trying to learn how to profit from those. And then the conversation just kept getting more and more heavily biased towards cryptocurrency, and boom, gold and silver was still there in the background. But What is your feeling with that whole gold and silver world? Because there are people like, oh gosh, please come to me, the name Mike Maloney and similar people that are just saying it's going to come, the biggest wealth transfer in history. It's going to come. You need to hold gold. You need to hold silver. And yet, on some of their chats, there are people saying, well, listen, I've been holding for 16, 18, 20 years. I know it goes in cycles, but what is your feeling about holding physical gold and silver?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. And again, it's going back to the diversification of your portfolio. So if you are spreading into gold and silver, then you're effectively moving out of the traditional finance markets like the US dollars or the pounds, etc. So it's good from that perspective. But why it's also important to think about is gold, based on the supply and demand model, and silver, it's specific to the amount that can be created and distributed into the market. It's finite. So if we go back to the supply and demand model, if the demand increases and the supply is limited, then it could potentially be a good way of diversifying your portfolio. If we think about US dollars, Australian dollars, there's quantitative easing, which means printing money. So that's why people start holding things like gold and silver. And Bitcoin effectively is a digital gold. It's a digital version of gold, is a simple way to explain it.
So it's kind of like where Bitcoin go, other coins follow. Where gold goes, silver follows.
So people are holding, in their portfolios are holding gold and silver, stocks, real estate maybe. So when you have all this diversified portfolio, and this is one of the things that I'm interested in knowing, because we weigh up our risk, and one of the things that lots of people are saying is the most riskiest is fiat currency, and people are predicting a bit of a crash. So if you've got $200,000 or something and it's just sitting there in fiat, would you say that's a risk? Do you see a market crashing anytime soon?
It's interesting that you asked that. So the US is investing and buying gold at the highest levels that they have done since, I believe, Q1 2015. Russia have just bought 82 metric tons of gold, which is the highest level that they've bought since 1993.
And China has been buying lots and lots of gold and silver too, hasn't it?
Wait a sec. Whoa, hold up. Sorry. I can feel the conspiracy theory coming on, because I heard that Trump was going to go back to the gold standard.
Interesting.
Anyway, continue. Sorry.
Can you talk about what the gold standard is, just to make that clear to other people who haven't got a clue what you're on about?
So in 1971, Nixon de-paired gold from the US dollar. So basically that meant that the US dollar was no longer backed by gold. So you had to have gold in reserve that was equivalent to the amount of US dollars that was in circulation. And since he de-paired that, effectively that's the gold standard that was de-paired from it, which has definitely been a big driver of the just surpassing $22 trillion worth of debt that the US is sitting in. So yeah, I think that's probably quite an interesting factor, but also the deflation of the value of the US dollar since that happened as well has been quite significant. And it happened in European markets a lot earlier. I think it was 1913 when it was first announced from, I believe it was the UK. I'm not quite sure, and then follow further through in 1930, I believe.
I wanted to ask you, there were a couple of things that came up from the conversation. We do have some questions here, but the conversation is organically taking us elsewhere, which I love. First of all, that whole notion of gold and silver, I was going to mention to listeners, I'll put it in the show notes, but there's a really fabulous series. I think now it's got up to 12 episodes called The Hidden Secrets of Money by Mike Maloney. And it's digestible enough that I sit down and watch it with my kids, and they're like, Mum, can we watch the next one? Mum, can we watch the next one? So it talks about the history of money, and it talks about the manipulation of money in banks and all sorts of things. And he also mentions gold and silver. But when you were saying having real estate in your portfolio, I'm interested because one of my mentors, Paul Council, was saying to me, well, I wouldn't be touching real estate if I were you with a barge pole. And I'm like, oh, okay, why is that? And he's going, even if the market is low, you might buy a property at a really cheap price, but you're going to have to hold on to it for maybe 20, 30, 40 years before you realize any real developments on that, any real sort of increase in value. Because according to him and according to property cycles, we're in a glut, and because the Gen Xs, which is my generation, are sandwiched between the baby boomers who are full of money and the Gen Ys who couldn't give a flying about working their lives away, it's going to be a long time before the Gen Ys have got kids and they're going to be looking to buy property. So you're going to have to hold that property until there's a demand for it again from the maturing Gen Ys. And so he was saying, like, use your money in other ways as opposed to tying yourself down with a mortgage and negative gearing and all those other nasty, pasty aspects for the next 20, 30 years. And myself personally, we were very much affected by the GFC. We had a daughter who was born with massive toxicity issues, which also cost us a couple of $100,000. And it's been 10 years that my partner has been working on the mines to pay off an empty debt. So we have been very much touched by being involved in a property market, which then crashed, and then repaying a bank or opting to go in for, debt suicide, i.e., bankruptcy. So I'm interested to know whether you really do think that holding property is a healthy aspect of a portfolio at this point in the cycle.
Yeah, and it's a really good question. So what I would say to that is there's the old rich versus the new rich. The old rich have always been conditioned to have tangible assets because the new digital age is quite new to them effectively. So I see that if your parents and your parents' parents have always told you property, that's where you should be investing, then you kind of somewhat take that on as a younger person. So I do believe there's a big shift now with millennials completely moving away from that, and now the older generations really catching on to understanding that this is how the future looks. You don't actually own stuff like cryptocurrency, you own a bit of code. So it's not my position to say whether it's a good idea to hold property now or not. But what I would say is there's opportunities to create greater amounts of wealth than we've ever seen before in different markets. And the investment or the initial investment is far less than what it would be sinking a huge amount of finances even into a deposit. I think just to get on the ladder nowadays, you're probably looking at 60K, which means what does your lifestyle look like to be able to generate that kind of wealth in the first place? But I do still see, if we look at population increasing, I looked at the figures the other day, I think it was almost, we're heading up to 8 billion very quickly. So again, it goes back down to the supply and demand laws. If the supply is increasing, but not increasing at the same rate as demand, I think we're 40,000 homes in surplus in Melbourne. Therefore, what does that indicate potentially? So it's kind of more stable, lower returns. If you do well in the property market, you maybe look at 7-8% a year if you're doing really well. But compare that to, say, let's just use cryptocurrency as an example in 2017 when it went up 4,000% as a market, and it outperformed every other market in the world 15 times over. So it can be, it's good to diversify, but what you're diversifying into is changing, shall we say, rapidly.
Well, can you imagine investing or contributing that 60K that would have been a deposit on a house that you might see a return on, by the time you're 60, as opposed to, it's a high risk and it depends on your appetite for risk, but as opposed to getting involved in the crypto market or something similar and like seeing what that 60K might have turned into, or could have gone the other way as well.
That's why I effectively moved out of those sorts of markets and went heavily into cryptocurrencies, because I wasn't getting rich anytime quick, right? I don't want to wait until I'm 40, till I have financial freedom. I wanted it, and I'm patiently impatient. So I figured out, how can I get that right here, right now?
With all of that in mind, we know that perhaps the property is a bit risky, and we have to look at our risk with everything, with all of our assets. And I think that's a personal sort of approach, this might be a bit negatron, but like if you know that you've got about 10 or 15 years until your kids move out, or you might have an illness and you've got like I don't know, 5 years left, you think about what you have going on in your life and perhaps what's going to pay off and at what time, that sort of thing. So I think it's personal. But when it comes to your crypto assets, I had a load of what are now shitcoins in my portfolio. How do we go about looking at what suits us and on a personal level? How do we go about judging what sort of cryptos we should have in our basket?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So just to put some statistics to what you were saying, roughly 55% of coins, new coins that are coming into the market now fail, which is quite a high number when we reflect on it. But then when we think about businesses, I think it's something like 9 in 10 fail in the first year. So it's nothing new. There's a couple of questions within that. So the first thing being what to identify in a coin. So the top three things that I'll quickly reel off now, first and foremost is the team. You have to identify who is in the team, what are they able to contribute, what past results and success have they had, and that quickly be able to identify what is the potential of them actually creating a successful coin of the future. Other things to look at are real-world user case. So people are creating fantastic coins that are for driverless cars, so they can be powered on the road 24/7. Some NASA scientists. Great idea. How many driverless cars are there on the road right now? I don't see too many here. I know San Fran there are, but we have to be realistic. What's the real world user case in this point in time? And also hype. If you want to invest into a good coin, it doesn't matter how great the coin is itself and what user case it has. If no one knows about it, no one's going to use it. It's not going to have any adoption and no one's going to invest in it. So there are three things to think about as a listener there when investing in a coin. On the other side, it goes back to diversifying the portfolio as well. So, or altfolio as they're called, altcoins, altfolio, it's quite funny.
Nice.
So what you want to think about is how established is a coin? How long has it been in the market? Has it actually delivered on its promises? So we think about Bitcoin, which is over 10 years old now. Naturally, that's probably going to be a safer investment, which may have lower volatility, therefore less returns potential. And similar to Ethereum, which has been around for over 5 years, we've got Ripple, which is a newer one, but that's sitting in the top three right now. Then we can move back to new coins that are just listed in the market, very new, high risk, no results as such, so we can't really predict their performance and work out where the forecast of their future is going to be. And then you've got ultra high risk, which is your initial coin offerings. So an initial coin offering is a new coin that raises finance through investors like us before it launches into the market. And that's obviously ultra high risk because it's a lot newer in the project. And then you have the VC firms, which actually do pre-ICO, which is really interesting. So that's kind of a breakdown of what your altfolio may look like. And according to that is where you would spread your risk.
I think there's an interesting thing here, which, if we're talking about the subject of money, and we've obviously touched on real estate, we've looked at precious metals, we've not yet really spoken about the stock market, but we've talked comprehensively to a degree about crypto. But what about debt? What about the fact that most people in the world, whether it's the result of social engineering as the conspiracy theorists would have us understand or otherwise, what about the fact that most people are carrying such incarcerating levels of debt that they can't actually really step out and make a difference in their lives? I mean, I think that's an important thing to question if we're looking at money health or financial health.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I was reading an article recently that every household as an average is leveraged 120% of GDP, which is quite a scary thought. And that's kind of, again, it goes back to the banks and the misconduct potentially and over leveraging that they allow people to go through. Debt is good. So I definitely don't think debt is a bad thing. When you understand how to use it effectively and when you can leverage upon it to maybe offset and write off some of your other assets and income. So I think whilst debt is seen as potentially bad, it's also it can be very important for growth of a business or investments in certain areas. So it's a bit of a balance between it, but truly understanding. And we can talk about conspiracy theories and so on, but it takes 2 seconds to look at a few actual events like the GFC and banks getting fined $29 billion US dollars. No one went to prison, I don't think, for it, which is quite surprising, or not surprising. So it's really interesting in that front. And then we had the banking reform recently, where the 2 senior people from NAB had to step down. So it's kind of, again, I always call it conditioning. We've been conditioned to give banks credibility, and they have our best interests. And it's,
excuse the pun, credit cards.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know. So what banks have effectively done now is try to move their focus to credit cards, and the reason being is because they can actually receive a higher return from customers. Anyone can go into a bank now, get a credit card, and they'll probably give you a 7 to 10K limit on that, knowing that you're not going to be in a position to repay it. And then in the fine print at the bottom, they say 17 APR, 19 APR. It's crazy. And then people spend their lives doing balance transfers, or they don't even know about that because we're not taught financial education at school. And again, you can talk about conspiracy theories between the education system that we've been rolled out for the industrial era, and it hasn't really revolutionized since then. So
there's actually an amazing video that I'd like to find and share in the show notes by Noam Chomsky. I actually learned about him for the first time as a linguist when I was studying at university, but he has such an interesting take on social engineering and the fact that we have all been conditioned to be part of this debt machine, and that credit cards, and it goes on and on, but it's fascinating. I'm going to share that. I think that you're not ranting. I think you're sharing, and it's actually real education.
Yeah, and that I love that you say that. It's real education. It's not the education that educators have been taught. And that, again, like if you're taught from a governing body, they're going to teach you what they want you to be teaching others, right? So you don't look outside of the box. But I think for most people, especially in the world of cryptocurrencies, they're generally of a similar nature. And they're people that are futurists and they think differently. They don't accept the status quo. They don't accept this is how it should be. They go and find how they believe it should be. And that's what I find from a lot of my clients as well. They're either spiritual people or they think very differently. So it's interesting.
And yet we're not possibly going to be seeing mass adoption of crypto until the banks are handed over to people on a silver platter saying, we like crypto. Here's our marketing ploy, jump in. Well, so it's a catch-22.
It takes 2 seconds to look at that, though. So a great example, Jamie Dimon, he's the global CEO of JP Morgan. 2017, he called Bitcoin a fraud. 2018, he retracted his statement. 2019, as the largest global financial institution in the world, he releases JPM coin. So they've released their own coin as of the middle of February, which is predominantly to connect into bank at the minute, and they will move potentially outside of that. I read an article today. They are starting to look at consumer crypto as well. So it's crazy how you can have such a 180 from what's seen as the leading institution in the world.
And Martin McGinty, in a previous episode, he is the CEO of Blockbox here in Perth, and he spoke exactly about Jamie Dimon and that complete lack of, let's say, congruity in his messaging.
And then we think about manipulation of markets as well. You have to raise questions around that, how the cryptocurrency space can be manipulated because the market cap isn't exactly significant when you compare that to traditional markets. So the volatility is caused through a lack of volume and a lack of the amount that's actually held in the market. So when announcements like that come from people that are seen as leaders of the world when it comes to finance, they can manipulate markets. I know Warren Buffett did a very similar thing when he called Bitcoin a mirage. And now he's one of the heaviest investors into blockchain technology for his supply chain of diamonds. So it comes back to what is this and where do we go forward from here? But also, as an intelligent investor, using this information, generally what happens, the market is attached to emotions when investing. If you can separate the emotion out of your investment, you can really start to benefit from this sort of information.
But I want to know what you think about the future of cryptocurrency in that realm. Like, do you think that the banks are just going to, like Abidi said, roll out their own cryptocurrency, or and that's when mass adoption will happen? Or do you think it's going to be people like us who get the rest of the public involved and crypto keeps its initial, I guess, underlying foundation of decentralization? How do you see this panning out?
Oh, it's a very interesting question to ask. So I think, like anything, the overruling powers such as the banks will try to somehow get a piece of the puzzle, because it goes back to the revenue. If people are creating revenue in an area, they want part of that. And that's potentially why JP Morgan have been one of the first banks to actually release a coin around it. So I think there will be a definite movement of centralized functions trying to claim decentralization, but when you really look at it, it's not actually that decentralized. So it will be an interesting future how this pans out, and I'm not too sure really what the future looks like, in all honesty, and that's why it's important to stay up to speed and do the research and gather more data points effectively when trying to analyze the future, because that's a very important thing to do. So I haven't really answered your question there. I've danced around it as I have my politician's hat on, delivering an answer and not actually giving the answer.
That's okay. It's great anyway, because we're asking this question, so we're getting a lot of different responses from different people, and I think it's really good for the audience to sort of get a little bit of a different perspective from everyone. So no, thank you. It was beautiful.
Well, thanks again, Joe, for being on the show. I've loved chatting. I've loved riffing. It's felt like a conversation around a gold and silver / crypto coffee table. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for having me on, both of you. It's been an awesome chat.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Okay, Converted, even though a lot of the stuff he's talking about I'm familiar with, I totally want to do his course.
he's just like a normal guy, isn't he? And I think that's because he's a kid who grew up in finance. Like, he's a kid who grew up with the knowledge. He's a cool guy. He's easy to listen to.
I like his humility and the fact that he talks about his story and the fact that he's come from this family where he wasn't, I mean, we're all privileged if we've got a roof over our head and we've got food in our belly and we feel safe and we've got parents, but to a degree, you know, the challenges he talks about, his father leaving home at 7 a.m. and often getting back at 10 p.m. And I think as mothers in current day society, we can relate to that because we are generally working 24/7 without a single drop of pay. A lot of the times, you know, we can also be working. I'm not to say we're all at home, but a lot of the times our partners are working as well, and they're still doing those long hours, and they're still doing that exchange of time for time and labor for money. And what Crypto Joe starts to explore together with us is the various potential vehicles for stepping out of that cycle of swapping money for time and stepping into other vehicles which give you more options in life.
He didn't really go into what I want to know from every single person we interview is, when's the crash coming? You know, how everyone talks about like when the financial crash is coming, and I guess no one wants to be held accountable for, like, you know, with the whole 2012 moment. The world's going to end in 2012, and then all the people who said it look like weirdos.
Well, what about the K2000 or the year 2000? All the computers were going to stop. It was just one big marketing hype.
I know. And so, but I just feel like everyone we interview doesn't want to say like when moon. No one wants to say when crypto is going to bounce back, and no one wants to say that, you know, the financial system's going to crash in May 29th.
We totally need to get Cliff High on the show. He's responded in the past and said no, but he's really interesting. He's a predictive linguist, and he scrapes the internet for information and conversations that have gone on, and then collates all of that into a document which basically shows a prediction of what's going to happen in the next 3 to 6 months based on information in the internet. And some of it falls through because it's very volatile and it's subject to obvious change. But there are other things, like he predicted the freezing in the Northern Hemisphere, and the fact that we were going to go through an extremely long, cold winter in Europe. And it's absolutely happened. And even our own beautiful Naomi Brockwell experienced, that she was talking about when she went back to the States after visiting Western Australia and what was it called? The polar vortex. So there are all sorts of things that Cliff High has actually predicted which have happened. So I think we need to get him on the show. Ask him again.
Does he have like a bunch of, he's a subscription thing, isn't he? Like you receive.
Yeah. So you receive the report. He does the Cliff High report. Yeah. He's a funny guy. He's on Twitter as well. He's a laugh and a half. He's got all these really funny memes about linguists. And I think there was one about a cunning linguist, a cunnilingus.
No, that's always lovely.
You've got to get a
little bit of cunnilingus.
Enjoy the odd bit here and there, but very odd and very here and there. But he's a fun guy to listen to. He's an absolute hoot. Anyway, Joe, yeah, I love speaking about him. And in terms of prediction, maybe we need to just send him a quick email and include that in the show notes. Is it going to happen, Joe?
I would like to know, and I also want to know more on whether or not Trump is going to go back to the gold standard, because I heard that it was going to be January this year, in 2018, and then I heard it was going to be 2019. And now I'm hearing it it's like January of every year. You hear that's when Trump's going to release the...
Yeah, we talked about it last year, didn't we?
Well, the year before, in 2017.
Yeah, we did. Do you know when you've got any good project and you get a timeline and then it always falls through? So like if you're building a house and they say it's going to be 12 months, then it's going to be 3 years. I just think we stick with that. Whatever they're planning, you just blow it out by another couple of months, which, for the preppers, you just make sure you got lots of gold and silver and cash in your house and all of that jazz.
Yeah, but
when
I think about, this is my theory. It's not even a conspiracy theory. It's just I'm thinking about how adoption works, and when, let's just say that actually it is conspiracy. Let's just say we're waiting for the powers that be to have crypto mass adoption ready. So maybe when crypto mass adoption happens, it's time for the financial crash because they've got something to fall back on.
Exactly. And what about this whole amassing of gold? I mean, gosh, that's
it's dodgy, isn't it? It's sus.
And at the same time, gold and silver prices have been kept low. So people like you and I, or maybe people who aren't like you and I have got a really low appetite for it because they can see that it's not performing, in inverted commas.
Oh, they just want to buy it low.
Yeah, exactly. And they do the same with crypto. They keep it down low, nobody's in. And then the minute it starts climbing, boom, everybody's scrabbling to get onto the ladder.
Yeah. Oh, we're going to see another one of that. I don't know when. I'm not going to say when because I'll jump into the same bus everyone else is so that I don't get held accountable.
Come on, tell us when. You're very good at that stuff. Anyway, you're doing tarots. Tell us when. Oh, my God.
Nope.
I guess that's a wrap then.
Okay. And anyway, on that note, I'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Crypto Clothesline.